For years, I kept my secret hidden from my son. He saw me living modestly, with the same old furniture, no designer bags, and rarely a luxury purchase in sight. To him, I was just a regular mom working a typical office job. But what he didn't know was that I was making a small fortune, $40,000 every month, to be exact. You see, I wasn't just any office worker. I'd climbed my way up from a humble secretary to a senior executive at a multinational corporation. I had been signing multi-million-dollar contracts and making decisions that impacted thousands of lives. Yet I never let on about it to my son. Why would I? Money had never been something I flaunted. It was just a tool for stability, not something I needed to display to feel validated. But one afternoon, my son Marcus called me, sounding unusually nervous. He asked me to join him for dinner with his wife's parents, who were visiting from overseas. "Please come, Mom, it's important," he said. I could tell he was worried about how they might perceive me. I could sense that he wanted to impress them, to make sure his mother didn't embarrass him. I agreed to come. But this time, I decided it was time for a little experiment. If my son wanted me to fit into a box of simple and modest, then I would play along. But I would do so on my terms, and I would see how they treated someone they thought was less than them. It wasn't just an ordinary dinner invitation. This felt different. It felt like a test, a moment where everything I had carefully crafted, the life I had built, was about to be examined under a microscope. And I was more than ready for it. As the days passed, I prepared. I didn't care about looking nice. In fact, I made sure to look the opposite. I dug out the worst outfit I had, an old, faded grey dress that had long seen better days, wrinkled shoes that had taken the shape of my feet after years of wear, and a canvas tote bag that had lost its shine. I made myself look like someone who had been through life and come out the other side a little worse for wear. It was perfect. I was about to step into a world that judged on appearances, and I wanted to see how they would treat someone who didn't fit their mold. Saturday evening arrived, and I took a taxi to the restaurant. It was located in one of the most exclusive parts of the city, where the lights sparkled like diamonds in the night. The kind of place where a single dinner could cost as much as a month's rent for an average person. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness as I pulled up to the grand entrance. I'd been to places like this before, work events, corporate dinners, but this time I wasn't attending as a confident executive. No, tonight I was just a mother trying to survive. When I stepped out of the taxi and walked into the restaurant, the atmosphere was nothing short of intimidating. The doorman opened the door with a smile that was just a little too polite, and the people inside seemed to glide rather than walk. Everyone was dressed to impress, their clothes more like armor than fabric. The sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter filled the air, but the moment I crossed that threshold, I felt like I didn't belong. I wasn't there to fit in, though. I was there to watch, and I was watching closely. I saw my son, Marcus, standing by the window, looking more out of place than I had ever seen him. He wore a tailored suit, dark, sharp, and expensive, his hands nervously adjusting his cufflinks. He looked just like the man he had become, trying to present a picture of success. And yet, he couldn't quite mask the discomfort in his posture, the unease that radiated off him. And there she was, my daughter-in-law, Simone. She stood next to him, her golden hair falling perfectly around her shoulders. Her cream-colored dress shimmered, as if she were made of fine porcelain. But her eyes, when they met mine, weren't full of warmth. No, they were cold, calculating, and full of an emotion I couldn't quite place. Disdain, embarrassment, maybe both. But I wasn't there to guess. I was there to observe. Simone's parents were already seated at the table, looking every bit the part of the wealthy, sophisticated couple they undoubtedly thought they were. Veronica, the mother, was a vision in a green dress that caught the light with every movement. Her jewelry was heavy, glittering with the kind of wealth that could not be ignored. Beside her sat Franklin, Her husband tall, proud, and impeccably dressed. With a wristwatch that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. They were everything I suspected they would be: polished, immaculate, and utterly uninterested in anything beyond appearances. I took a deep breath and approached the table, walking slowly, almost reluctantly. Marcus's eyes widened when he saw me, as if he had just realized that his mother wasn't the woman he thought she was. His gaze lingered on my dress, my shoes, my bag, and then met my eyes. I could see the discomfort in his face, the awkwardness in his smile. He wasn't proud of me. No, he was embarrassed. And that hit me like a gut punch, but I hid it well. "Mom, you said you'd come," Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly. "Of course, son," I replied, my voice calm and steady. I wouldn't miss it. Simone gave me a quick, cold kiss on the cheek. "Mother-in-law, nice to see you," she said, her tone flat, her eyes never quite meeting mine. The introductions to her parents were swift and dismissive. They didn't look at me with curiosity, but more with mild indifference, as if I were just another item on their list of things to endure. Veronitza's handshake was stiff, her grip light as though I might break under her touch. "A pleasure," she said, her lips curling into a smile that was more polite than genuine. Franklin's handshake was just as weak, his smile just as practiced. I took my seat at the end of the table, the farthest from everyone else. No one offered to pull out my chair, no one asked if I was comfortable. I was just a shadow in their perfect little world. As the waiter arrived with the menus, I pretended to be overwhelmed. The menu was written in French, and the dishes looked more like art than food. Veronica noticed my confusion immediately. "Do you need help with the menu?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I nodded meekly. "Yes, please." "I don't know what most of these words mean," she sighed as if my ignorance were a personal inconvenience to her. Then she ordered for me something simple, as she called it. "We don't want to overdo it," she added, as though my presence at the table was a burden on their evening. And so it began. Veronica spoke loudly about the money they had spent during their trip. She mentioned the luxury hotel they were staying at, the $1,000 per night rates, the fancy stores they had visited, dropping prices like they were casual facts. She wanted me to be impressed, to feel inferior. But I wasn't impressed. I just listened. "How lovely," I replied, my voice soft, almost apologetic. And then she asked, "So, what do you do, Aura?" I lowered my gaze, playing the role I had carefully crafted. "I work in an office," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just paperwork, filing." "Nothing special," Veronica nodded, almost approvingly. Administrative work." "That's fine." "Honest work," she said, as though I should be grateful she didn't dismiss me outright. The food arrived, beautifully plated and impossibly small. Veronica commented on the price of each dish, as if she were justifying her own choices. "This steak is $80, she said with a dramatic pause. "But it's worth it. You can't just eat anything, right?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Of course," I replied, my voice a little too quiet, a little too meek. As the dinner continued, Veronica steered the conversation towards money. Her questions were subtle, but every word was designed to make me feel inferior. "So, do you live alone, Aura?" she asked, her eyes scanning me, as though I were a specimen to be studied. "Yes, I live alone in a small apartment," I replied. "I manage. It's not much, but it's enough," she sighed, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Oh, Aura, you are so brave, really. It must be so hard for you, living alone like that. But of course, everyone gives what they can, right?" Her words were laced with judgment, and I could feel the anger rising inside me, but I kept it in check. The evening was playing out exactly as I had imagined, but there was still a sense of unease gnawing at me. I knew exactly what Veronica and Franklin were trying to do. They were attempting to use money as a weapon to measure my worth, to make me feel small, insignificant, as though I was somehow lacking because I didn't live in the world they occupied. And it was working. They had already begun to paint me as an insignificant figure in their perfect, expensive world. It wasn't just the constant remarks about their travels, their investments, their luxury lifestyle. It was the way they spoke about everything, how money was the measure of success, how they were superior because they had more. It was suffocating. They were trying to control the conversation, to make me shrink further into myself. But the more they tried to belittle me, the more I could feel my resolve growing stronger. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not tonight. Veronica, with her fine wine in hand, leaned over and asked me if I enjoyed the meal. Isn't it just divine? You know, this is a $200 bottle of wine. You really can't get better quality than this. Her voice dripped with condescension. I smiled politely, a smile that I knew didn't reach my eyes. It's lovely, I said, my voice calm. I don't really know much about wine, though. I usually stick with something simpler. Her lips curled up in a smug smile. Of course, not everyone has a trained palate. That comes with education and experience. She made a point to glance at Franklin, as if to validate her words. I felt my anger simmer, but I controlled it. I suppose you're right. Some people never get the opportunity to learn about such things. But that's all right, isn't it? Not everyone needs to be an expert in everything, I said, my tone gentle but cutting. Franklin shot me a look of mild surprise, clearly not expecting me to respond that way. Veronica, on the other hand, just chuckled. You're so modest, Ara, that's charming. Really, I smiled, but it was the smile of someone who had seen through their shallow facade. They could pretend they were better because of their wealth, but I knew better. It wasn't their wealth that defined them. It was their arrogance, their sense of superiority, their belief that they could control everyone around them with their money. The conversation turned back to family matters. Veronica, ever the manipulator, brought up Marcus and Simone's future. You know, Marcus and Simone are doing so well, she said, with a slightly too loud voice. We've been able to help them with so many things, getting their house, their honeymoon, their lifestyle. After all, when you love your children, you do everything you can to help them. Her words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown at me. I knew exactly what she was implying. What had I ever done for my son? How had I failed him by not giving him a life of luxury and indulgence? The rage started to bubble up inside me, but I forced myself to remain calm. I had made a promise to myself that I would play this game to the end. I wouldn't let them see the truth just yet. You know, Veronica, I said, my voice steady. When I raised Marcus, I focused on one thing, teaching him to value hard work, integrity, and independence. I didn't want him to feel like he had to rely on me or anyone to live a good life. Veronica tilted her head, a look of feigned confusion on her face. But surely, Ara, you don't think that helping them isn't important? Of course, everyone has their own approach, but I believe family support is key. Stability, after all, comes with financial security. I could feel the trap closing in. They were setting me up to look like a bad mother, to make it seem as if I had failed Marcus by not showering him with money and privilege. It was a classic mover play to make me feel guilty for not adhering to their shallow standards of family love. I took a deep breath, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment before speaking. Stability comes in many forms, Veronica. And for me, the most important thing I could give Marcus was the ability to stand on his own 2 feet. To know that he could navigate this world without relying on anyone else for his happiness, his success, or his peace. Veronika's smile faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered. Well, everyone has their own way of doing things, she said, as if dismissing my words with a wave of her hand. But you must admit, Ara, it must be hard for you to live on your own, without much support. I leaned back in my chair, my posture straightening as I allowed the silence to settle. It's not hard at all, I replied, my voice calm. I've made a life for myself. A simple life, yes, but a life I'm proud of. Veronica opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the waiter arrived with the dessert menu. I seized the moment. I think I'll have the simplest option, I said, looking at Veronica with a knowing smile. After all, simple is all I know. The rest of the dinner continued with more forced pleasantries, more digs at my lifestyle, more attempts to belittle me. But I knew what was coming. I could feel it in my gut. They were going to offer me something that would look like charity, but was really a way for them to maintain control over me. It was coming, and I was prepared. As the waiter cleared the dishes and brought the check, Veronica turned to me. Ara, Franklin and I were talking, and we think it might be a good idea to offer you some support. You've done so much for Marcus, and we feel it's time to help you in return. My heart sank, but I kept my face neutral. Support? I asked, though I already knew what was coming. Yes, Veronica continued, her voice dripping with false kindness. We were thinking of offering you a small monthly allowance just to help with your living expenses, of course. It would allow you to live more comfortably, without Marcus worrying about you. I could see where this was going. They wanted to buy my silence, to make me disappear from their carefully crafted world. They wanted to pay me off, to ensure that I wouldn't disrupt their perfect little picture. I looked at them, my mind racing, and then I smiled. How generous, I said, though my tone was anything but grateful. And how much are we talking about? Veronica hesitated, as if calculating the right amount that wouldn't be too obvious but still enough to get me to comply. Well, we were thinking around $500 a month, maybe $700, something modest. Of course, I sat back in my chair, letting the words sink in. $700 to disappear from my son's life. $700 to stop being a mother, to stop being part of his world. I could feel the anger welling up inside me, but I remained calm. Is that all? I asked, my voice cold. And what would you want in return? Veronika's smile was tight, almost satisfied. Well, we would expect you to respect Marcus and Simone's space. Not to interfere too much, not to be a burden. The words echoed in my head, and in that moment, everything became clear. They didn't see me as a person. They didn't see me as Marcus's mother. I was just an obstacle in their perfect life, a problem to be managed. The weight of her words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. $500, $700, a small price for me to fade away from my son's life. To become someone they could control, someone they could manage like an insignificant detail. I sat there, still, not allowing a single muscle to move. Veronica, with her gleaming jewelry and expensive wine, looked at me with that calculated smile of hers, expecting me to be grateful. Franklin, too, was waiting for my reaction, his face a mask of condescending pity. But I wasn't angry, not yet. What I was calm. Deadly calm, because in that moment, I saw through everything. They thought they could buy me. They thought they could manipulate me with money to make me disappear quietly. But I wasn't that woman. I never had been. I placed my napkin on the table with deliberate slowness, my fingers brushing over the cloth. The silence at the table was almost palpable, as if everyone was waiting for me to respond, to thank them, to beg for their generosity. But I didn't. I simply looked at Veronica, and then Franklin. My gaze was steady, unblinking. That's an interesting offer, I said, my voice low but clear. Truly generous. I paused, letting the tension build, before adding, but I have a few questions. Veronica raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised that I wasn't reacting the way she expected. Of course, ask whatever you like, she said, her tone sweet but laced with thinly veiled superiority. I leaned forward slightly, my elbows resting on the table. How much exactly would you consider a modest monthly allowance? Veronika's smile faltered slightly, and I saw her eyes narrow in calculation. Well, we were thinking around $500. Maybe $700, depending on your needs. I nodded slowly, pretending to contemplate. $700 a month, I repeated quietly. For me to leave my son's life, to stop being a part of it. And to what end? So that you can feel better about yourselves? There was an uncomfortable pause. I could feel Marcus shifting in his seat, his hands clenched on the table, but I didn't look at him. No, I was focused on Veronica and Franklin. They were the ones trying to control the narrative to buy my silence. Is that all I'm worth to you? I asked, my voice rising ever so slightly. $700 for me to disappear from my son's life. I could see the discomfort spread across their faces. Veronica opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. No, I said firmly. I won't accept your offer, Veronica. Not because I don't need the money, but because this isn't about money. It's about respect. And you've shown me none. Franklin's face twisted in frustration. Ara, you're misinterpreting this, he began, trying to salvage the situation. But I wasn't having it. No, I'm not misinterpreting anything. I interrupted him. You offered me money, not out of kindness, but to control me. To make me disappear quietly, so you could keep your precious image intact. I paused again, letting my words sink in. They had no idea what they had walked into. They thought they could buy me off with their wealth, but they had underestimated me. I turned my gaze back to Marcus, who had been silent up until this point, his face pale with shock. Marcus, do you think your mother can be bought? Do you think I've worked my entire life just to be treated like this? You've always seen me as a simple woman, a humble woman, but I am much more than that. Marcus didn't respond immediately. His eyes were wide, his jaw clenched. He looked like a man who had just realized the magnitude of what I had kept hidden for so long. The truth was unraveling before him, and he didn't know how to handle it. Simone, sitting quietly beside him, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She avoided eye contact, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, but I knew she was listening. I continued. I've worked hard, Marcus. Harder than you'll ever know. And I've done it on my own. You never had to worry about me. You never had to know how hard I fought to get here. Because I wanted you to grow up with the values that matter. Values that have nothing to do with money. Marcus opened his mouth, but his voice cracked. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? Why didn't you tell me all of this? I took a deep breath, my heart softening. Because I didn't want you to rely on me, son. I wanted you to build your own life, your own success. I wanted you to value hard work, not the things money can buy. For the first time that evening, I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly seen. Not as the woman they wanted me to be, not as the meek, modest mother who accepted their judgment, but as the woman I had worked so hard to become. And then, just as I had suspected, the moment arrived, the final twist. Veronica, clearly rattled, turned to me with a smile that was now all venom. I see, she said slowly, her voice ice cold. You're not the poor, naive woman we thought you were. But let me ask you, Aura, what's the point of all this wealth? You live in a small apartment. You don't wear expensive clothes. You could have so much more if you just embraced who you really are. I smiled, a smile that was both sad and knowing. That's exactly it, Veronica. I've worked for everything I have, and I don't need to flaunt it to prove my worth. Because unlike you, I know that real wealth isn't about the things you can buy. It's about peace. It's about freedom. And it's about living authentically, without fear of judgment. Simone, finally speaking up, looked at me with a mix of awe and confusion. But if you have all this money, why do you live like this? She asked softly. Because I don't need to impress anyone, I replied, my voice steady. I don't need anyone's approval. What I need is my peace of mind. And that, Simone, is something you can't buy. You either have it or you don't. Absolutely. Here's the next part of the rewritten script, maintaining the same theme and style while continuing the story. Part 5. The realization that dinner had shifted. It was no longer about the food or the luxury of the restaurant. It wasn't about who could buy the most expensive wine or who could wear the most glamorous clothes. It had become a battle for respect. And that was a battle I was determined to win. Veronitza's gaze remained cold, her eyes narrowing as she absorbed my words. But I saw the flicker of doubt in her expression, a crack in the facade she had spent her entire life building. She wasn't used to people challenging her, especially not someone she had considered beneath her. But that was the thing about people like her, they couldn't see beyond their own wealth. Their own privilege. I have to admit, Veronica finally spoke. Her voice a little strained. I didn't expect this. But I think you've misunderstood. Ara, you see, we only wanted to help. We wanted to make sure Marcus and Simone had everything they needed to build a good life. Her words were hollow, full of self-justification, and I could hear the panic creeping into her tone. She was losing control, and she didn't like it. Help. I echoed, leaning in just slightly. Is that what you call it? Offering me money so I would disappear from my son's life? That's not help, Veronica. That's manipulation. Simone shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Her eyes darted between me and her parents, and for the first time, I saw something different in her expression. It wasn't the judgment or disdain I had seen earlier. No, this was guilt. She was beginning to realize that what had transpired at this table wasn't just an innocent family dinner. It had been a subtle game of power, and she, too, had been complicit. But instead of confronting her parents, she remained silent. She was caught between loyalty to her family and the realization that everything I had said was true. She had been blind to the manipulation, but now the blindfold was coming off. And I knew the truth was starting to settle in her heart. Franklin's face was stiff, his jaw clenched tight. He had been quiet throughout most of the conversation, clearly uncomfortable with the way things were unfolding. But he couldn't stop what was happening. The truth had already been laid bare. There was no more pretending. I turned back to Marcus, who had been silent for too long. His gaze was fixed on the table, his hands fidgeting nervously with his napkin. Finally, he looked up at me, his expression conflicted, torn between the mother he thought he knew and the one standing before him now. Mom, Marcus began, his voice shaking slightly. I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me all of this before? His eyes were filled with confusion, regret, and something else, something I couldn't quite place. I took a deep breath. Because you never needed to know, son, I said softly. You've always been independent, and that's what I wanted for you. I wanted you to build your life without ever feeling like you were dependent on me, or anyone else, for your happiness or success. But I didn't know. Marcus exclaimed, frustration creeping into his tone. I didn't know that you were so successful. I just thought you were. He trailed off, struggling to find the words. You thought I was poor. I finished for him. That I was struggling? His face flushed, and I could see the shame in his eyes. I didn't mean it like that, Mom. I just didn't know. I smiled, but it wasn't the smile of a mother comforting her son. It was a smile of quiet strength. I know, Marcus. I know. But sometimes we create our own assumptions about people. You assumed I was living a modest life because that's what I showed you. And I did that on purpose. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on both of us. My son was realizing that his perception of me, his mother, had been based on a false narrative. A narrative I had carefully woven so he wouldn't feel the burden of my success. So he could grow up without thinking that he needed to match my accomplishments to be worthy of love. Simone, who had been quiet for far too long, finally spoke up, her voice small but filled with an unmistakable sincerity. I had no idea. I really didn't. Her eyes were on me, filled with both remorse and a newfound respect. I didn't realize how much you'd been through, how hard you worked. I gave her a small nod. You're not alone in that, Simone. But it's not about how hard I worked. It's about how I lived. And I chose to live quietly, to let my work speak for itself, rather than flaunting it or using it to manipulate others. She wiped her eyes, tears threatening to spill. I'm sorry. I should have known better. I should have listened. I could see the guilt in her face, but also a sense of relief. The heavy veil of her parents' influence was beginning to lift, and she was finally seeing things for what they truly were. But it wasn't easy. It was never easy to confront the truth, especially when it was uncomfortable. I turned back to Veronica and Franklin, who were sitting stiffly across from me. They hadn't said a word since Simone spoke. They knew they had lost control of the situation, but there was still a faint flicker of arrogance in their eyes, as if they believed they could somehow salvage this moment, like they could still dictate how things would end. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not tonight. You see, Veronica, I said, my voice cool and steady, what you don't understand is that money isn't everything. It's not the measure of a person's worth. You've spent your entire life measuring people by what's in their bank accounts, by what they can buy. But there are things money can't touch. Things like love, respect, and dignity. Veronice's lips tightened into a thin line. But I wasn't finished. You believe that because you have money, you have power. But the truth is, you're just as empty as the things you collect. All those jewels, all those properties, all those vacations, they mean nothing if you can't connect with people on a deeper level. Franklin's face hardened. But I could see the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his drink. I had exposed their truth. They were no longer the polished couple they had once appeared to be. They were just people, with insecurities and fears, hiding behind their wealth. The silence between us was thick, heavy. The tension was so palpable that you could cut it with a knife. But I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't afraid of what was coming next. Finally, Marcus stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's go. This is enough." I stood up too, my movement slow but resolute. "No, son," I replied calmly. "Not yet." Marcus looked at me, confused. But I wasn't ready to leave yet. Not before I made my point crystal clear. I turned to Simone. "You've learned something tonight. You've seen your parents for who they really are. And now it's time for you to decide how you're going to move forward. Don't let their money define you. Don't let their values shape your own. You are more than what they have." Simone nodded, tears still welling in her eyes. "I won't forget this, I promise." I looked back at Marcus and then at Veronica and Franklin. The damage had been done. They had shown their true selves, and now they would have to live with the consequences. With one last look, I turned and walked toward the exit, my heart pounding with a strange sense of liberation. The truth had been spoken, and it had changed everything. I walked out of the restaurant, feeling as though a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't just the tension of the evening that had lifted, it was the burden of pretending. For so many years, I had kept up this facade of simplicity, living beneath the radar, never allowing anyone to see my true self. And tonight, that had all changed. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I took a deep breath. The lights of the city flickered in the distance, and for the first time in what felt like years, I felt truly alive. There was a freedom in revealing the truth, in showing the world who you really are, no matter how uncomfortable it may make others. Marcus followed me closely, his step slower, heavier. I could feel the weight of his confusion, his regret, and maybe even his newfound understanding of who his mother really was. I could see it in his eyes, the realization that everything he thought he knew about me had been turned upside down. "Mom," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea. I thought you were. I thought you were just this ordinary woman, just getting by. I never knew. Why didn't you ever tell me?" We walked slowly down the sidewalk, the night air wrapping around us like a blanket. I paused for a moment, taking in the city around me, before responding. Because you didn't need to know, Marcus, I said softly. You didn't need to know, because I wanted you to learn the value of independence. I wanted you to know that you could make it on your own, without feeling like you had to rely on me, or anyone else, for your happiness. He stopped walking and turned to face me. But you were living this entire life behind closed doors, Mom. Why? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me know the truth? I looked at him, my heart aching, but also proud. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to become like them, Marcus. I didn't want you to become obsessed with money, with appearances, with status. I wanted you to value what really matters. Family, love, hard work, integrity. Those things are what will give you true happiness, not the number in your bank account or the car you drive. He stared at me for a long moment, his face a mixture of disbelief and realization. Finally, he nodded slowly. I get it now, Mom. I see what you were trying to do. I see what you were protecting me from. We continued walking in silence for a few more moments, the weight of the night settling in. It wasn't until we reached the taxi that I finally turned to him, looking him square in the eyes. You've learned something important tonight, I said quietly. Not just about me, but about life. About what really matters. He nodded again, his expression more composed now. I think I've learned more tonight than I have in years. I always thought I knew what was important, but I never really understood it until now. We climbed into the taxi, the car pulling away from the restaurant, leaving behind the night's chaos. But I knew this wasn't over. The real work was just beginning, not for me, but for Marcus. For Simone, too. They would both have to find their own way now. The world they had known, the life they had been living, would never be the same. When we got home, Marcus and I barely spoke. I could feel his mind racing, his thoughts tangled up in everything that had transpired. The weight of it all was hard to shake off. But as we entered the building and made our way up to my apartment, something shifted between us. It was like the world had suddenly opened up, and he could see things more clearly than ever before. I made us both a cup of tea, and we sat in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I knew that the conversation was far from over. Marcus still had so many questions, so many things he needed to process. But for now, I was content to give him space. It wasn't just about what I had done for him, it was about what he had to do for himself. Finally, after what felt like hours, Marcus spoke, his voice softer than usual. I want to talk to Simone. I need to explain everything to her. I need to make sure she understands what's going on. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay with her parents. I nodded. You should. It's not just about you anymore. It's about both of you, together. You need to have a conversation with her about what you learned tonight. Don't let her hide behind her parents' money. Don't let them control you. He looked at me with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. I'll talk to her, Mom, I promise. I could see the weight lifting from his shoulders. He was beginning to understand. He was beginning to see the world with new eyes. And that, I realized, was the whole point of what I had done tonight. It wasn't about humiliating anyone or making a statement. It was about giving them the truth, letting them see people for who they really were, without the filter of wealth or status. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. Marcus and Simone had their conversations, their moments of clarity. I could tell they were both still processing, still working through the shock of everything that had happened. But what struck me the most was the way Marcus had taken control of the situation. He had set boundaries with his in-laws, something he had never done before. And that, more than anything else, gave me hope. Simone, too, had changed. She came to see me a few days later, her appearance more relaxed, her posture different, less rigid, less controlled. It was clear that she was starting to find her voice. When she arrived at my apartment, she was dressed simply, without the usual facade of wealth and perfection. It was like she had shed the layers of her past and was finally standing in front of me as her true self. "I've been thinking a lot about everything you said," Simone began, her voice soft but determined, "about how we measure people by what they have, not by who they are. And it's made me realize how much I've been living in a bubble created by my parents. I don't want to live like that anymore." I smiled, nodding gently. "You don't have to, Simone. You've seen the truth. Now you have the power to change things, to live your life the way you want to. Don't let money control you. Let your heart and your values be your guide." She nodded, wiping away a tear. "I want to be better. For myself, for Marcus, for our future children. I don't want them to grow up in this world where money is everything." I reached out, placing a hand on hers. "You'll be fine, Simone. You'll find your way. Just remember, the most important things in life aren't the things you can buy. They're the things you can't." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of our conversation hanging in the air, and for the first time, I felt like I had truly made a difference. Not just by revealing my own truth, but by helping someone else see theirs. Days turned into weeks, and the change I had hoped for in Simone began to take root. She had taken what I had shared and truly reflected on it. She started questioning everything: the way her parents viewed the world, the way money defined success in their eyes, and even how it had shaped her own view of herself and her worth. It wasn't easy for her. The conversations with her parents were uncomfortable and filled with resistance. They didn't take kindly to the boundaries Marcus and Simone had set. In fact, they acted as though the very foundation of their world was crumbling beneath them. But the more they fought it, the more I saw Simone stand firm. The girl who had once cowered under the weight of her parents' expectations was now standing tall, finding her own voice. One evening, a few weeks later, Simone came to visit again. This time, there was no shame in her eyes, no hesitation. She was at peace with herself, and I could see it in the way she carried herself. She wasn't just Marcus's wife anymore, caught between two worlds. She had become her own person. "Mom," she said, her voice steady and full of purpose. "I'm learning. Every day, I'm learning something new. It's not easy, but I'm not afraid anymore." I smiled at her, proud of the woman she was becoming. "You're doing great, Simone. But remember, this is just the beginning. You've broken the cycle, but the real work is in staying true to yourself, even when the world around you tries to pull you back into the same old patterns." She nodded, understanding the weight of my words. "I'm not going back. I won't let money control me anymore. I've realized it's not just about what we have, it's about how we live, how we treat others, and most importantly, how we treat ourselves." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "Good, you've learned something that many never will. The moment you stop letting money define your worth is the moment you truly begin to live." Simone stayed for a while longer, and we talked. We talked about everything: about her childhood, about her relationship with Marcus, about the things she had learned from her parents, and the things she now wanted to teach her future children. There was no rush in our conversation, no pretense. Just two women connecting, sharing experiences, and making sense of a world that often feels too driven by external validation. Marcus, too, had changed. He had grown quieter, more thoughtful, but also more confident. The conversations with his parents had not gone as they had hoped. They had pushed back against his decisions, tried to make him feel guilty for setting boundaries. But Marcus stood his ground, and it was a turning point for him. No longer was he the man who had blindly accepted the influence of money and power. He was becoming his own man, one who would live on his own terms. One evening, after Simone had left, Marcus and I sat in the living room, a comfortable silence between us. It was a silence that had once been filled with questions, confusion, and uncertainty. Now it was filled with understanding. Mom, Marcus said, his voice low but filled with sincerity. I never realized how much you were protecting me. How much you shielded me from all of this. From their world. I didn't know the weight you carried. I didn't know what it took for you to keep everything together. I looked at him, my heart swelling with pride. You didn't need to know, son. I wanted you to grow up valuing the right things. I wanted you to understand that money is just a tool, not a measure of who you are. Marcus looked down at his hands for a moment before speaking again. I was wrong, Mom. I always thought that if I had money, I'd be happy. That it would make everything easier. But now I see that it doesn't. It just creates more problems. It makes people act like they're better than everyone else. It makes them forget what really matters. I nodded, my gaze softening. You've learned the hard way, Marcus. But now you know. And that's what matters. It's never too late to change, to choose a different path. Marcus stood up, moving towards the window and looking out at the city below. I could see the weight lifting off him, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in years. I want to be better, Mom, for myself. For Simone. I want to be someone who doesn't measure success by the size of his paycheck or the clothes he wears. I want to be a man of integrity, one who values people, not things. I joined him at the window, standing beside him in silence for a few moments. The city lights twinkled below, each one a reminder of the world beyond. A world that didn't care about the things we owned, but about how we treated each other. How we made people feel. You already are that man, Marcus, I said quietly. You just had to find it inside yourself. You've done the hard work. Now just keep walking down that path. Time passed, and the tension between Simone, Marcus, and her parents slowly faded, though not without its challenges. There were still awkward moments at family gatherings, moments when Veronica and Franklin tried to assert their influence over their daughter's life. But Simone and Marcus stood their ground, more united than ever. I watched them, proud of the lives they were building together, lives grounded in love, respect, and the lessons we had learned. It was a slow process, but every day they grew stronger in their commitment to each other and to the values that truly mattered. One evening, as I sat in my modest living room, sipping tea and watching the news, I received a message from Marcus. Mom, it read, I just wanted to thank you again for everything you've done. I see things so much more clearly now. You've taught me more than I could ever repay. I love you. A lump formed in my throat as I read the words, a tear escaping down my cheek. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the fancy dinners or the false promises made by people who thought they could buy respect. It was about love. It was about teaching my son and daughter-in-law that who you are inside is what truly matters, not the things you own. I responded simply, I love you too, Marcus. And I'm proud of the man you're becoming. As I set my phone down, I looked around my apartment, small, simple, but mine. A place where I could be myself, without the pretense of wealth or status. A place where the true riches were the moments spent with the people I loved. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. The world had thrown its challenges at me, but I had survived. I had thrived. And the best part was knowing that the next generation, my son and his wife, would carry these lessons with them into the future. A few months later, I ran into Simone at a local park. She was walking with Marcus, their arms around each other, laughing like they hadn't a care in the world. When they saw me, they waved enthusiastically, and Simone rushed over to hug me. Mom, she said, her voice full of warmth. We're planning on having a baby. We're excited, but also a little nervous. We want to raise them the right way. We want them to know the value of love and respect, not just money. Tears welled in my eyes as I hugged her back. I'm so proud of you both. You're going to be amazing parents. As I watched them walk away, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of peace. I had done what I set out to do. I had taught them that true wealth wasn't in the things they owned, but in the love they shared and the way they treated others. And for the first time, I realized that I had built a legacy not of money, but of love, integrity, and humility, and that, in the end, was worth more than anything money could ever buy. It was early morning when I received the call. I had just finished my usual routine, making my tea, watching the morning news, and enjoying the stillness of my simple apartment. I was still savoring the calm when my phone buzzed on the table. It was Marcus. "Mom," his voice came through the receiver, clear and filled with emotion. "I need to tell you something. Simone and we're expecting twins." For a moment, I didn't say anything. My heart soared, but I held back tears. This moment, the one where I knew my son was about to become a father, was a monumental one. It felt like everything I had done, every choice, every sacrifice, every lesson shared had led me to this moment. "Twins," I whispered, barely able to believe it. Marcus chuckled softly. "Yeah, 2 little ones. We're shocked, but we're also so happy, Mom. Simone's parents don't know yet, but I wanted to tell you first. I wanted you to know that we're going to raise them differently. We're going to make sure they know the value of kindness, of family, of humility." A warmth spread through my chest, something deeper than just pride. It was the satisfaction of knowing that the legacy I had worked so hard to establish, the one that wasn't about money, but about character, was being passed on to the next generation. It wasn't just Marcus and Simone who had learned these lessons. It would now be instilled in their children. I took a deep breath, my voice shaking just slightly with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, Marcus. And Simone. You both are going to be incredible parents. Just remember, the greatest gift you can give them isn't the most expensive toys or the nicest clothes. It's love, and teaching them how to be good people. That's what really matters." "I know, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I promise we will. Thank you for everything you've taught me, for helping me see what's important." I'll never forget it. I could hear the sincerity in his words, and I knew this wasn't just a passing sentiment. He had grown. He had evolved into a man who understood that true wealth wasn't about material gain, but about the things you couldn't buy. Weeks passed, and as the news of the twins spread, the reactions were mixed. Simone's parents, Veronica and Franklin, were, as expected, stunned. They hadn't taken well to the boundaries Marcus and Simone had set. They hadn't understood why their daughter and son-in-law no longer sought their approval. But this news about the twins seemed to shake them more than anything else. Simone had told them in her own way, her own terms. There were tense moments, uncomfortable silences, but in the end, Veronica and Franklin's response was not as harsh as I had anticipated. It wasn't that they had changed, or that they had come to see the world through a different lens. But they were starting to realize that they couldn't control everything, and that their money didn't buy them the love or respect they had hoped for. One evening, as I sat at home, enjoying my quiet space, I received a message from Simone. "Mom," it read, "I want to thank you again. For everything. For your strength. For teaching me how to be a better person, how to live my truth. It's not easy, but it's worth it. You've shown me that money doesn't define me. My love for Marcus and for the family we're building, that's what matters." Tears welled up in my eyes as I read the words. They were simple, yet they held so much weight. Simone had truly embraced everything I had tried to teach her. She was no longer the woman who had hidden behind her parents' wealth and expectations. She had found her own voice. And more than anything, she was now living the life I had always dreamed for her, life built on love, integrity, and humility. Months passed, and the twins were born, a boy and a girl, both healthy and strong. Marcus and Simone were overjoyed, and their lives had taken on a new rhythm, a new purpose. I could see the joy in their eyes every time they looked at their children, every time they held them in their arms. I could see the love they were giving them, and I knew that this family was breaking free from the patterns that had once defined them. One day, as I visited their home to meet the twins for the first time, I watched them interact with the children, their faces lighting up with every tiny gesture. They were no longer the people they had been, trying to live up to an image of success dictated by others. They were now simply parents loving, dedicated, and present. Simone caught my eye and smiled, her face full of warmth. "Thank you, Mom," she said quietly, as she rocked one of the babies in her arms. "I've learned so much from you. I know I won't raise them the way my parents tried to raise me. I want them to know the true value of love, of kindness, of being humble." I stepped forward, my heart swelling with pride. I reached out and placed my hand on her shoulder, squeezing it gently. "You're already doing it, Simone. You're already giving them everything they need. And the greatest gift you can give them is the one you've learned the value of being true to yourself." She looked at me with tears in her eyes, her voice soft but steady. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. You've been my guide, my role model. And I hope one day they'll know the kind of woman you are. I hope they'll see that money doesn't buy happiness. Love does." I couldn't speak for a moment, the emotion of the moment overwhelming me. I simply nodded, knowing that my job, as a mother, was done. I had done what I set out to do. I had taught my son and daughter-in-law to live with purpose, with dignity, and with love. As I left their house that day, the twins in their arms, I couldn't help but smile. I knew that this was the legacy I had created. It wasn't built on wealth or possessions. It was built on values, on love, on integrity, and that was more than enough. As time went on, I continued to live my life the way I always had, quietly, humbly, but with a heart full of peace. I still worked hard, still invested my money wisely, but I no longer felt the need to impress anyone. I had everything I needed right here in my heart, and in the love of my son, daughter-in-law, and their children. And when I looked back at everything that had happened, the dinner, the revelations, the pain, and the growth, I realized one thing: true wealth is not in what you accumulate, but in what you give. It's in the moments you spend with loved ones, in the way you show up for people, in the integrity you carry. And above all, it's in the legacy you leave behind, not in your bank accounts, but in the hearts of those you love. I had broken the cycle. I had made my peace with the world and with myself. And in the end, that was all that truly mattered. As I sit here now, reflecting on my journey, I realize that the most valuable thing I gave my children, my family, and even myself was the truth. The truth about who I am, about what truly matters, and about the way we all should live. The world may always be driven by money, by status, by appearances. But at the end of the day, none of that will matter. What will matter is the love we give, the kindness we show, and the way we choose to live with integrity. And that is the legacy I will leave. A legacy not of wealth, but of something far greater. The weeks that followed were filled with change. Marcus and Simone were slowly, but surely establishing their own path, one where the toxic influence of her parents had no place. Their relationship was stronger now, solidified by the struggles they'd faced together, and by the new foundation they were building. But not everyone was thrilled with their newfound independence. Veronica and Franklin, unable to accept the shifts in their daughter's life, continued to challenge her decisions. They saw it as betrayal, a direct threat to everything they had ever stood for: control, wealth, and dominance. What they couldn't grasp was that Simone wasn't rejecting them. She was rejecting the false narrative they had imposed on her. One afternoon, as I sat with Marcus and Simone at their apartment, the doorbell rang. The moment I heard it, I knew who it was. Simone looked at me, concern flickering in her eyes. She wasn't sure what her parents were going to say, but deep down, I knew she had grown enough to face whatever came through that door. When she opened it, Veronica and Franklin stood there, a look of forced politeness on their faces. It was a strange mix of tension and restrained anger, and I could see that neither of them wanted to give in, yet neither wanted to completely sever ties. "Simone," Veronica said, her voice as cold as ice, We need to talk." Marcus and I exchanged glances before he stepped forward, standing tall beside Simone. He wasn't going to let them walk all over her anymore. "You've had your say, Veronica," Marcus replied, his voice steady but firm. "And now it's our turn. We've made our decisions, and you need to respect them." Franklin's jaw tightened, his face red with suppressed anger. "Respect? You think we're going to just let you throw away everything we've worked for? You think we're going to let you raise our grandchildren without understanding what it takes to survive in this world?" Marcus didn't flinch. "I've been surviving just fine, Dad, and I'll teach my kids how to survive. Without relying on money to make them feel superior. Without using wealth to control others." Simone stood beside him, now confident in her stance. "You don't get it, do you? We're not rejecting you. We're rejecting the way you've taught us to measure success by how much we have, not who we are." Veronica's lips pressed into a tight line, and Franklin shook his head in disbelief. "So this is it then? You're cutting us out of your lives. That's your choice." Simone took a step forward, her voice unwavering. "No, Mom, this isn't about cutting anyone out. It's about making sure our family has the space to grow, to be healthy, to love each other for who we are, not for what we own." The room was thick with tension, but I could feel the shift. It wasn't just Simone standing up to her parents. It was Marcus, too. They were no longer the children of Veronica and Franklin, they were adults, building their own legacy. Finally, Veronica's cold facade cracked, just slightly. "I just want what's best for you both," she said quietly, almost defeated. "I wanted to make sure you didn't end up like me." Simone sighed, her eyes softening. "Mom, you taught me a lot, but I don't want to live in the same world as you. I want to be better than that." Veronica's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought I saw a glimpse of something more human behind the polished surface, a mother who, despite her faults, still wanted the best for her daughter. It was fleeting, but it was there. Franklin grunted in frustration. "You think this is what's best for you? Fine, but remember, we've given you everything. Everything. Don't come crawling back to us when it all falls apart." "We won't," Marcus said firmly, a small but knowing smile crossing his face. "Because we're not the same people we were when we walked in here." The confrontation with Simone's parents wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. There were still many difficult conversations to be had, but Marcus and Simone were finally free. Free from the expectations that had suffocated them for years. Free to live life on their own terms, but even though they had set their boundaries, there was still a lingering question. One that haunted both of them. Could they truly escape the influence of Veronica and Franklin? I remember sitting down with Simone one afternoon, a few weeks after the heated confrontation. We were at a small cafe, the kind where the world seems to slow down, and people talk without the rush of city life surrounding them. It was the perfect setting for a difficult conversation. "I don't know, Mom," Simone said, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "I keep thinking, did we do the right thing? We're setting these boundaries, but are we just pushing them away completely? Are we breaking our family apart?" I looked at her, the calm in my eyes reflecting the certainty I felt. "Simone, sometimes the hardest thing to do is what's right. You've spent your whole life trying to please them, trying to make them proud. But in the end, you've realized that your true worth isn't in their approval. It's in your own choices. And that's the hardest lesson to learn." She looked down at her coffee, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I just want them to understand. I want them to see that we're not rejecting them. We're rejecting the way they view the world." I nodded slowly. "And it's not an easy thing for them to understand. They've lived their whole lives believing that money is everything. They don't know any other way. But you do, Simone. You've broken free. You've found a new way to live, one where love, family, and integrity are the true measure of success." A tear slid down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. "I just want to make sure we don't regret it. I want Marcus and me to be strong enough to hold onto this. You will be, I reassured her. You already are. It's not about what you have. It's about what you've learned and what you'll teach your children. Simone smiled faintly, a sense of peace washing over her. I hope they can understand that one day. I hope they'll see that we did this because we love them. Because we want them to grow up in a world where they know their worth. It was a year later when the true reckoning came. Marcus and Simone had learned to live with the decisions they made, and they were growing stronger every day. But their parents, despite their previous attempts at understanding, had not truly let go of their old ways. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Veronica, standing at my door with a look of exhaustion and a hint of something else regret. Apology, I opened the door slowly, unsure of what to expect. Veronica, I said cautiously, what are you doing here? She didn't speak at first, just stood there, her hand resting on the doorframe. I needed to see you, she said quietly. I've been thinking a lot about everything. About what happened. About my daughter, and what I've done to her. I didn't say anything immediately, but let her continue. I've tried to control her, she admitted, her voice trembling. I tried to make her live the life I thought she should. I thought if I just gave her more, showed her how to succeed, that she'd be happy. But she wasn't, and now I see why. She paused, her eyes meeting mine. I don't know how to make things right. But I want to try. I want to be part of her life again, without the control, without the money. Just as a mother, just as a grandmother to my grandchildren, I looked at her, seeing the raw honesty in her eyes. The woman standing before me wasn't the same woman I had met all those years ago. She had broken through the walls she had built around herself, and in that moment, I could see her vulnerability. You're doing it right now, Veronica, I said softly. By admitting the truth. By letting go of the need to control, you've taken the first step. Now, it's up to you and Simone to find your way back to each other. She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. Thank you for showing me the way. Thank you for helping me see that love, not money, is what matters most. The road to healing wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. But it started with small steps, honest conversations, a willingness to listen, and a commitment to change. Veronica, Franklin, Marcus, Simone, and I all had a part to play in it. Over time, the walls began to come down. Veronica and Simone rebuilt their relationship slowly, piece by piece, with no rush, just a deep, mutual desire to understand each other. There were awkward moments, tears, and regret. But there was also forgiveness. And in the end, that was what mattered. The family that had once been so fractured began to heal. And it wasn't about money or status. It was about love. Real, unconditional love. The years passed, and the life I had envisioned for my children, one built on truth, love, and respect, began to unfold in ways I never thought possible. Marcus and Simone were thriving, not just as a couple, but as parents. They were teaching their children what I had taught them, and slowly, I began to see the ripple effect of all the lessons that had been passed down through the generations. Simone's relationship with her parents, though not perfect, had evolved. Veronica and Franklin had softened. They weren't the same people they had been when I first met them. They weren't perfect, but they were trying. They understood now that their wealth did not define their value, that their children were not their possessions to control, but people to nurture and support. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. A true peace, the kind that comes from knowing you've done what you set out to do, that you've changed lives for the better. One afternoon, I sat in the park, watching the world go by. It was a peaceful day, with a soft breeze and the golden light of the sun casting a warm glow over everything. I sat there thinking about all that had transpired, the struggles, the pain, the growth, and I realized that it had all been worth it. The sacrifices, the quiet lessons, the moments of doubt. Everything had led to this dot. As I sat on the bench, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see Simone standing there, her smile as warm as ever. She was no longer the unsure woman who had once been caught in the trap of her parents' expectations. She was strong, confident, and full of life. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "I've been meaning to talk to you." I stood up and hugged her, feeling the weight of all we had been through together. "What's on your mind?" She pulled back slightly, her eyes soft. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "For everything. For teaching me what really matters. For showing me that I don't have to follow anyone's path but my own." I smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've always had it in you, Simone. I just helped you see it. I'm proud of you." "So proud." She paused, looking at me with a deep sense of respect. "We're raising our kids differently, Mom. We're not raising them to chase money. We're teaching them to value kindness, honesty, and hard work. I just want you to know that." My heart swelled with pride. "I know you will, Simone. I know you'll raise them right. And I have no doubt they'll grow up to be just as amazing as you and Marcus are." She smiled and hugged me again. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" "We have," I said, my voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "And it's been worth every step." We stood there for a moment, just watching the world go by, the sound of children laughing in the distance, the soft hum of life moving forward. And in that moment, I realized something truly profound. True wealth, the kind that lasts, isn't about what you accumulate. It isn't in your bank accounts or the things you own. It's in the relationships you build, the people you touch, the love you give and receive. That's the real legacy. And as I looked at Simone, I knew that legacy would continue. It would live on in her, in Marcus, in their children, and in all the lives they would touch. It would live on in the lessons of love and kindness that I had passed down. Lessons that would continue to echo through the generations, and that, I realized, was the greatest gift of all. I looked up at the sky. The sun setting slowly behind the trees, casting a soft glow over everything. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. This was my legacy. This was my wealth. And I was content.